My name is Neka, and I'm here to tell you the story of Ike. Ike is a man who came to my village many years ago, a man who became part of our lives in ways no one could have imagined. He was a handsome, hard-working young man with bright hazel eyes that seemed to see beyond the ordinary. He arrived in our village as a sojourner, seeking work and a place to stay. He quickly became my father's staff, a trusted worker who could do any work for anyone, more like a handyman. From fixing broken fences to building homes, Ike was always there, his work flawless and his presence comforting. There was something extraordinary about Ike, though. He was well liked by everyone, admired for his work ethic and his charm, but there was always a mysterious aura about him, something that made people whisper behind his back. Some said it was his eyes. They seemed to shimmer with a light that felt otherworldly. Others said it was the way he would disappear for long stretches of time, without anyone knowing where he went. Despite his many virtues, Ike never spoke much about his past. He was happy living in the village, working for my father and helping us whenever we needed it. But there was one thing he kept hidden. He never spoke of his family. It became a question that lingered in the air for years, especially for his wife, Onyinyi. Onyinyi was a beautiful and gentle woman, and she loved Ike deeply. She often asked him, "Why don't we visit your people? Why haven't I ever met your family?" But Ike would always give her a gentle smile and promise, "Soon, my love, soon." Years passed. They had 2 children, a son and a daughter, and Onyinyi became pregnant with a third. But still, Ike kept delaying the trip to his homeland. His excuses were always the same. "The time isn't right. We'll go soon." Onyinyi, who had been patient for so long, grew increasingly curious. She wanted to meet her husband's family, to understand where Ike came from. Finally, the pressure became too much. My father, a respected chief in the village, took it upon himself to intervene. "Ike," he said, "your wife deserves to meet your people. It is time to take her to your village. The sooner the better." Ike, reluctant at first, finally agreed. It was decided. Onyinyi, Ike, and their 2 children would travel to Ike's village. The journey was long but smooth. The sun hung high in the sky, casting its golden glow over the dusty roads. They arrived in Ike's village in the heat of the afternoon, when the children were in school and the adults were working in the fields. The village was quiet, peaceful, with the sounds of birds singing in the distance and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. Ike led Onyinyi and the children down a narrow path, pointing to a small compound not far from the main road. "That's my home," he said, gesturing. "Go there with the children. I need to say hello to a neighbor. I will join you shortly." Onyinyi, trusting her husband, nodded and agreed. She took the children by the hand and walked toward the house Ike had pointed to, unaware of the startling revelation that awaited her. When Onyinyi knocked on the door, an elderly woman answered. She had a warm, kind face, her hair graying and tied neatly in a head wrap. "Welcome, my daughter," she said, her voice gentle. "Who are you looking for?" "My husband has gone out to work." "Are you here to ask for directions?" Onyinyi, bowing respectfully, replied, "I am Onyinyi, Ike's wife. We arrived here together, but Ike wanted to greet a neighbor. He'll join us shortly." At the mention of Ike's name, the elderly woman's expression shifted from warmth to confusion. "Ike? My son Ike," she muttered to herself, her eyes narrowing. "Why do you mean Ike is here? He is dead. He died many years' wife." "Ike died without being married or fathering any children." Onyinyi's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean he's dead?" she asked, her voice trembling. "He's alive. He's here with me, with our children." The elderly woman's face twisted in disbelief. You must be mistaken. My Ike was buried here long ago. He died." How can you say you're his wife? The atmosphere grew tense, thick with confusion and fear. Mrs. Kitty, Ike's mother, suddenly became frantic. Who are you really? Are you mocking me? She cried out. Why have you come here, claiming to be my son's wife? Anini, shocked and scared, tried to explain herself. But before she could finish, Mrs. Ike's eyes fell on the children, especially on Yanyi's son. It was then that Mrs. Ike froze. She stared at the boy, her eyes growing wide as she took in the features. The bright hazel eyes, the same high cheekbones, the same jawline. The resemblance was undeniable. Her son, the son who had died, was now standing before her in the form of his children. Mrs. Ike let out a loud gasp, her face drained of color. This child, he looks just like Ike. How is this possible? She shouted, her voice rising in shock. Come and see. The villagers must witness this. My eyes have seen my ears. Come on, neighbors. The villagers who had begun to gather watched in stunned silence. Whispers spread like wildfire. The woman claiming to be Ike's wife, the children who looked so much like him. It was too much to comprehend. When Ike's father, Mr. Ikedi, returned from his work, he was dumbfounded. His eyes widened when he saw his grandchildren realize the truth. The boy looked exactly like a younger version of Ike. The villagers murmured in disbelief. Ike had been dead for years. There was no way he could have fathered these children. Onyini, overwhelmed by the revelation, collapsed in shock, fainting in the arms of the villagers. The villagers, now in hushed silence and confusion, followed Mrs. Ikedi to the graveyard. Unassuming, covered in grass and vines, Mrs. Ikedi knelt by the grave, tears streaming down her face as she spoke softly. This is where Ike's body lies, she says, as tears were streaming down her eyes. Onyini, still dazed, stood frozen, staring at the grave that they pointed to her. The realization hit her hard. She had lived with a ghost, loved a ghost, and raised children with him. The villagers stood quietly, absorbing the weight of the truth. Ike, who has been long dead and forgotten, has somehow managed to exist on Earth and acquired a wife and kids for himself, all the while being a ghost. When my village learned of Ike's true nature, the fact that he had lived among us, had worked, and had created a family, all while being a ghost, the atmosphere in the village became thick with unanswered questions. Ike, the man they had known as their neighbor, their friend, and even as my father's trusted staff, had never truly belonged to this world. His existence in the village as a ghost left everyone bewildered, and after the truth came to light, Ike was never seen again. Onyini, devastated by the revelation, tried to carry on with her life, but it was never the same. Ike's absence from their lives was now undeniable. The children, who had always seen their father as a vibrant and loving presence, were left with an emptiness they couldn't understand. They would often ask their mother, "Where is Daddy? Why doesn't he come home?" But Onyini had no answers. The man she had loved, who had been a constant in their lives, was gone without a trace. Over time, rumors began to spread. The villagers, still reeling from the shock, began to wonder if Ike's children were even fully human. Their striking resemblance to their father, especially the piercing hazel eyes and other traits, left many to speculate. Some whispered that they might be half human, half spirits, a product of Ike's otherworldly nature. Others believed that perhaps Ike's ghost had somehow passed on his essence to them, leaving his family in a state of limbo between two worlds. Onyini herself was never quite sure. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was something supernatural about her children, something that separated them from the other villagers. They were normal in every sense. They played, laughed, and grew as any children would. But there was always an aura about them, a subtle sense that they were not entirely of this world. No one could explain why the children had Ike's features so perfectly, why they seemed so connected to him, even though he was no longer physically present. And though Anini tried to move on, the mystery never left her heart. Sometimes, when the wind would blow just right, she could swear she heard Ike's voice calling her name from a distance. In time, as the children grew older, they began to ask more questions about their father, and Yumi struggled with how to explain. She told them about Ike's love for them, but she could never bring herself to tell them the full truth. How could she explain that their father had been a ghost, a being from the spirit world who had walked among them and disappeared without warning? As for Ike's family, they too were left in silence. Mrs. Ikedi, though she had been the first to question the reality of her son's return, never saw Ike again after that fateful day in the graveyard. Mr. Ikedi, too, was left with a sense of longing and loss, though he never spoke of it. The villagers were left with more questions than answers, and the mystery of Ike's life, death, and his return remained unsolved. To this day, no one knows what truly happened to Ike. Some say his spirit wandered off into the unknown, leaving behind only the imprint of his love and his family. Others believe he never truly left, and that perhaps someday he would return. But for now, the truth remains as elusive as the wind, and the story of Ike and his family remains a haunting mystery that no one can fully unravel.